Being recorded. Thank you everyone who has signed in tonight. Tonight we are finishing up our ag leasing workshop series with some webinars covering the same topics. This was all made possible by a grant from the Northeast Risk Management Education Center and USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. We'll repeat this again next week at the same time. But again, we have our partner links, all that up there. As we do this webinar, if you have any questions on any of the links, the website and everything can be found at this UMAG Leasing page. Any of the files, the presentations, you can find right here in the webinar files. I haven't had time to get them online yet, but they will be up online in the future. And now I will turn it over to Jenny Rhodes, who is the ag educator for University of Maryland Extension in Queen Anne's County, and let her kick it off. And it is all yours, Jenny.
Okay, thanks. We'll wait for, oh, great. Okay, get my little mouse here. Good evening. My name is Jenny Rhodes. Like Paul said, I'm the extension educator for Ag and Natural Resources here in Queen Anne's County. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about landlord and tenant relationships. Something we don't always think a lot about, but it is certainly very important certainly in today's world. So let's see. Okay. If you really look at the if you look at USDA NAS statistics, and these are just some statistics from Maryland. In Maryland, there's about 1.3 million acres owned, and acres rented is about 855,000, which is about 64%. And looking at our county data in Queen Anne's County, we really have about the same statistics. So certainly very important in an operation that there is some really good relationships and some good communication that go on between the landlord and the tenant. So these are some statistics that I pulled off. 65% landowners are over 60 years old. So certainly within the next 20 years, there's going to be a lot of land that's going to be turning over to a younger generation that may think a little differently. Most landlords are not actively engaged in farming, and some of them want to understand farming, and some just really don't. They're just happy to get their check. 50% live within 25 miles of rented land, so they, may be there. Maybe they want to see what you're doing, maybe they don't. But we have to think about the communication and how we're gonna get through that. 31% are men. 40% are women, so certainly something to think about, because maybe the way that you communicate with a man may be different from a woman, maybe not. 29% are joint male and female, so how are you going to communicate certainly or what are your relationships going to be, with them? And then really looking ahead, female landlords are expected really to increase as a lot of this land is turned over. And being an extension educator, we talk to a lot of different people on the phone. A lot of people calling and want to know about leasing land. Certainly very important. This was just I found this when I was doing some research on talking about lease and risk. And really, when it comes down to it, the landlord really wants they want to know about the characteristics of the tenant, and they want to know that they can trust them and that they'll be able to really maximize the returns on their property. So let's talk a little bit about communication. Communication is an act or process of communicating, a fact of being communicated. Sometimes it's just something we really do take for granted, we really don't think about, but we really need to think about this when we're going to communicate with our landlord or tenant. And what are those forms going to be? Speech, writing, signs, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, and really about knowing your audience. Sometimes we think we may know our audience, but in the end we really don't, because we don't really ask enough questions. So what are some of the basics to communication? Of course, we've all heard who, what, why, when, where, how. So certainly think about those things when you're talking back and forth as a tenant. We seem to have a lot of lingo, BMPs, best management practice, CRP, conservation reserve program. So there's a lot of things that we talk about that maybe our landlord may not understand. So just make sure that you take time and do, clarify those. Sit down and, have a conversation to talk about how you're going to communicate, or whether you're going to negotiate, because there's certainly a lot to do in leasing, and if they're involved in any type of planning schedule, and how you're going to deal with confrontation if there is. May Johnson will be talking about that next. So certainly take some time and think about that. Think about the way you give information, the way you seek information, and then make sure everybody is understanding, and never hurts to summarize what you've said. So for communication skills, speaking, certainly some of us don't have any trouble with speaking. Listening, I seem to think that more people have trouble with listening because we're listening, but we're really thinking about the next thing we're going to speak about. And then taking time. I'm sure we've all known people that you can really see them thinking about the next thing they're going to say. And then the nonverbal expressions in speaking is very clear, whether you're rolling your eyes, or you're sitting in a chair slumped over and not paying attention, or you sitting upright and towards the person. I think that really speaks a lot about your communication style. So think about that when you are communicating with your landlord or your tenant. So certainly very critical. And there are some models that we need to think about. So the sender, who's sending the message? It can be the landlord, can be the tenant. What is the message? Is it clear? Is the receiver receiving it? What are the channels? We're going to talk about the channels of how we're going to communicate. And then feedback. Make sure that you listen on either side so that you do understand any questions and you can give the correct feedback. And certainly, on both sides, you want to have certainly the correct effect. So we talked a little bit about verbal and nonverbal, but so in verbal, you've got oral, so you're just talking, writing. So it can be written, it can be in an email, it can be social media. And then we've got nonverbal expressions, expressive behaviors, and then certainly body language. So again, like I talked about, we really have to think about not rolling our eyes or huffing and puffing, or just think about those things, those nonverbal expressions of communication that can really send a sign, and maybe not the sign that you want to send either way. So means of communication, well, it used to be in the 60s, everybody picked up their telephone and they called people, but and they had a newspaper, and everything you could find out. If you wasn't on a telephone, you could find out in a newspaper, but certainly that has all changed, and there is just all kinds of ways of communication, and I can't stress to you enough, whether you're the landlord or the tenant, to make sure you find out how you want to, in that relationship, how do you want to communicate. We have several landowners here in the county that have 50 landowners, 50 landlords. So, they have worked with their landlords, and they work on a newsletter, because certainly it's almost impossible to get, make 50 phone calls to get information out, or maybe just to email. Texting, people text back and forth, and of course, person to person is still important. We're going to talk later on about resume. I think is very important, especially with the turnover of land, and you've got younger people owning land, and they're very familiar with resumes, and I think it's a really good tool that you can use. Website, maybe you might want to set up a website for your farm, for your operation. People can, your landowner or can visit, and other people can visit. Facebook. So again, as I tell people, be careful what you put on Facebook, and be careful who your friends are, because whatever's out there, people are going to read. But maybe that's the way that you're going to communicate. Twitter is a great means of transferring communication. Just very short. You can set up a hashtag for your farm name. So your landlord would get that information. LinkedIn is a more of a professional a page where you can put information on that. Maybe you want to do a blog. Maybe you like to write, and you can get them to subscribe to your blog. And then, of course, there's Instagram and Google Plus also. So there's a lot of different means of communication out there. So just sit down and have that chat and decide, how you're gonna communicate. And I think that's really a good way to get off to a really good start. So there's certain styles of communication, and every day we speak in these different styles, but maybe this will give you something to think about. So the styles are assertive, aggressive, passive, and then passive aggressive. So let's talk a little bit about each one of those, and I think we can all certainly um, identify. Probably someone or you've been in some situation that you have communicated this way. Most effective and healthiest form of communication the assertive. Style. Uh, it's how we really naturally express ourselves really when our self-esteem is intact. And we're really confident um, to be able to communicate without playing games are really manipulating. And it's really about when you really work hard communicate because you really want mutually everybody needs a solution. And we want everybody to be um, satisfied. And we really have to communicate communicate really clearly when we are doing this. And it's really all about win-win situation.